Welcome to Marriage Steps with Dr. Wyatt Fisher. We're developing deeply satisfying relationships is the goal, and following my 6 marriage steps is the path to get you there. I'm your host, Dr. Wyatt Fisher, licensed psychologist and marriage counselor. This show is about your life and your marriage, so call 303-596-6836 with the questions you want me to answer and leave a voicemail. Today I'm going to talk about harsh startups versus soft startups, and this falls under marriage step number 4, which is developing emotional attachment. And again, if you're not clear what those marriage steps are, you can go to my website, drwyattfisher.com, and click on marriage steps. Step 4 is all about developing emotional attachment, and that includes working through conflict and building emotional intimacy. So that's where this falls under harsh startups versus soft startups. So a harsh startup is when we are upset and we attack our spouse verbally. Maybe they've hurt our feelings, maybe they've offended us, maybe they haven't done something that we wanted them to do, and maybe they haven't met our needs in a certain way, and so we are feeling upset, and then we verbally attack them. We bring up what we feel with anger, with hostility, with accusations. That's called a harsh startup. And normally what's included in a harsh startup is you statements, which is accusatory, and a lot of always and never generalizations. Not surprisingly, when our spouse is on the receiving end of this, they get defensive or they withdraw. One or the other. They either fight or they flight, because no one likes feeling attacked, especially not in that way. And so it's destructive. And then we get less of what we want, because when we're upset, what we want is to feel validated. We want our partner to take ownership for their part. And ultimately, we want them to change the behavior they're doing that hurt us. But when we have a harsh startup, we get the opposite of that. We get their defensiveness or we get their withdrawal, one or the other. We definitely don't get long-term change. So a harsh startup is very common. That's what a lot of us do when we get upset, but it's toxic. So the growth area for a lot of people is a soft startup. And today's session is going to talk about how do we do that. Before I get into a soft startup, it's important to buy in to the importance of even dealing with conflict and dealing with hurt feelings when you have them. So what happens when you get upset in your marriage? How do you behave? Most people, when they get upset, they either get critical and cranky, or they shut down and they withdraw. Most of us go one way or the other, or it's a little bit of both. Maybe you get cranky and irritable towards them and snippy, and you're shutting down and withdrawing emotionally and physically from them because you're upset. And so this whole idea of I'm just not going to bring it up, don't let that be an option. Because when that's an option, it just divides your relationship. That's why you can't have emotional closeness without constructively learning how to deal with conflicts. So the soft startup is a way to do that, because it's going to give you skills and a tool in your toolbox for the next time you're upset in your marriage. You can pull out this tool and then have some confidence that you can bring up the topic in a way that's going to bring the results that you desire. So here we go. So the first step in a soft startup is you have to think about, how has your spouse improved in the area you're upset about? How have they improved? So you may need to zoom out here and look at a broader scope of maybe over the last year, the last couple years. How have they improved in the area you're frustrated with or you're hurt with? So one example in my marriage I can share that happened a while ago is my wife and I had decided that we were going to have some sensual time on a certain night. And if you're not clear what that is, make sure you listen to episode 3, which is all about the wedding cake model of sexual intimacy. So we had decided we were going to have some sensual time on a Monday night, and it got too late and we weren't able to. And so she told me, she said, you know what? I have my dance class tomorrow night, but I'm going to come home early to make sure we have that physical connection time tomorrow night. So the next day I was looking forward to it. I couldn't wait for it. I was anticipating it. And instead of her getting home early, she got home late and never mentioned it. And that really upset me. And initially, I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to cause a conflict. But because I wasn't bringing it up, I started withdrawing emotionally, and I started getting critical and snippy with my comments. And so I knew I had to bring it up. And so when I finally did bring it up, I followed these steps that I developed called the soft startup. So number one, again, is how have they improved? So I had to start with this with my wife. So how has she improved? And what I said to her and what I was thinking how she's improved is she has done much better over the past couple years on tracking our physical connection. That's not a natural need for her. And so often in our past, she hasn't been very mindful of that connection. In addition to her trauma in her past, it's made her avoid some of that connection. And so she has done a tremendous amount of improvement in that area in our marriage. And so I needed to remember that. So what about for you? When your spouse upset you and they hurt you, how have they improved in that area? You have to zoom out and capture the improvement. Okay, step 2 is how may they be innocent? When we're upset with our partner, we immediately think it's all their fault and they had malicious intent and they did it on purpose. But most of the time that's not true. So step 2 is looking for benefit of the doubt. Where could they possibly be innocent with this behavior? Where was it not all their fault? It may still be partially their fault, but where were they possibly innocent? So for me, with my wife, with this behavior where she came home and didn't mention our physical connection time, the part that was not her fault or that may be contributing to this behavior that was not intentional on her part is that she's been extremely busy at that time. She was starting new projects. She had a lot on her mind. She was starting new things in her degree program that she was going through. And so she was preoccupied. She had a lot happening. And so it's important for me to recognize that this was not her intentionally trying to be malicious, but that there was pockets of innocence that was not her fault or intentional. So what about for you? When your spouse did something, where were they possibly innocent? You have to capture that. Third is how did you possibly contribute to their behavior? So when I thought about my spouse, again, promising or saying we were going to have a physical connection the next night, and then she came home and she forgot about it, and she came home late, never mentioned it. The way I possibly contributed to that is I had not been nurturing our emotional connection as well as I could have been leading up to that. And that is a prerequisite for her to feel open to the physical connection. And a lot of females are like that, where they need to feel that emotional connection and closeness before they can feel open to the physical connection. But because we had not been nurturing that emotional connection, I could have been doing a better job on that. That may have contributed to the physical connection not being on her mind Tuesday when she got home. So that's a possible contribution for me. Now, what about you? So how are you potentially contributing? What did you do, if anything, that may have influenced your partner's hurtful behavior? Okay, this behavior that hurt you. Fourth, after you get through those 3, then you're going to express your complaint. And there's some rules with how you do it. The basic rule is you have to first identify your tender underbelly. Anger is almost always a secondary emotion. And so underneath that anger normally is something tender, such as hurt, sad, fear, lonely, etc. And so when we just express anger, that's going to make our spouse get defensive. So if we can look underneath the anger and identify our tender underbelly, that's going to naturally pull at the heartstrings of our spouse when they hear it. And so for me, the tender underbelly is I felt sad and I felt lonely because of that lack of physical connection. So what on the surface was anger, but underneath my anger was sadness and loneliness. The other guideline here with when you express your complaint is you're not allowed to say the word you, and you can't say the words always and never. You can't say you because it's an accusation. And you can't say always or never because they're generalizations, and they almost always go together. People say you always, you never. And when your partner hears the word always or never, they're going to immediately go to the exception. Oh yeah? Well, back in 1985 at 5 p.m. that didn't happen, did it? They're going to go right back to that exact moment where whatever you're saying always or never about did not occur. So you have to avoid those words. You have to avoid you, and you have to avoid always or never. So a sample complaint that I would have made in this situation would be, it was said that we would have a physical connection Tuesday night, but that didn't happen, and it wasn't brought up, and that really hurt my feelings and made me feel sad and lonely. So that would be my complaint. I just said that entire complaint without saying the word you, and I didn't say always or never. So how would you express your complaint? If you had to take the word you out and take always and never out, and you had to identify and express your tender underbelly, what would that sound like for you? So as you can see, this soft startup is going to take some time to gather your thoughts before you speak. And that's a good thing, because when we're upset, we get impulsive, and then we say things that are harsh. And that's the harsh startup. But instead, you need to take some time away. It may take 5 minutes, it may take an hour for you to gather your thoughts. How have they improved? How might they be innocent? How did I possibly contribute? And then what's my complaint? And with that complaint, what's my tender underbelly? And how can I say it without saying the word you and without saying always or never? So when I put this together for my wife, and when I finally said the soft startup, this is what it sounded like. First of all, I just want you to know that I really appreciate how much you've improved with tracking our physical connection and being open to our physical connection, because there's been huge strides, and I really appreciate that. And I know this isn't all your fault, because you've been super busy. I know you've had a lot on your mind. I know you've had a lot of new projects going on, and so I know what I'm about ready to share wasn't intended to be as hurtful as it felt. I also know that I may have contributed, because I know I haven't been prioritizing our emotional connection as much as you desire recently, and I know that that's a huge need before the physical. So I know I may have contributed as well. But the other night, when it was said that we were going to have a physical connection the next night, and when that didn't happen, it made me feel really sad, and it made me feel really lonely. That's a soft startup. So that's much different than if I would have just attacked my wife verbally and said you and always and expressed anger. And when I used this soft startup, she responded really well. She immediately took ownership for her part. She was not defensive because she did not feel attacked, and we were able to discuss it. And most likely, that's how your spouse is going to respond as well. So you have a choice. So this upcoming week, when you get upset, when you get hurt, think about these concepts. Think about, am I going to do this with a harsh startup, or am I going to try a soft startup? I obviously encourage you to try the soft startup and see what a difference it can make, not only for how you feel, but how your partner responds. Thank you for listening to Marriage Steps with Dr. Wyatt Fisher. For more information, go to drwyattfisher.com. That's drwyattfisher.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Take care.